Right. Thanks everybody for joining us for our October Climate Convo with health professionals for a healthy climate. Today we are with folks from the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute Urban Farm Project. And I am going to pass the baton to our speakers today to introduce themselves and their work. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. Joanine, Joseph, Jaween, Wiju, Addition class. Hello, all my relatives. My name is Joseph Vital. South Mountain is my Anishinaabe name. Here with EPNI today to talk about the East Phillips Urban Farm Project, and I live in Powderhorn. And I'll knock it over to Karen.
Hi, everybody. This is Karen Clark. I'm a resident of East Phillips neighborhood for more than 45 years and serve on the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute's Board of Directors and also on the Southside Green Zone Council. And retired about almost 4 years ago from the Minnesota legislature after hanging out there for about 38 years. Now I spend a lot of my time working on this issue, the issues of East Phillips, and particularly representing the Women's Environmental Institute and some of the work that we're doing. Let's see, Steve, you want to go next?
Yes, hello, I'm Steve Sandberg and I live in East Phillips neighborhood, and I'm on the board of EPNI and been really excited and passionate about this opportunity to have a community development at this awesome site. And so disappointed in the city so far that they have been putting roadblocks in the way of this and do not seem to grasp the amazing opportunity, and also so glad that there's health professionals for a healthy climate. That's wonderful, and I've enjoyed meeting Toya and Kathleen, and yeah, there's so much that our neighborhood could do with this piece of property and the wonderful building, and Karen's passion for urban farming, year-round urban farming, was kind of the nut that we started with. And so anyway, I've lived here in East Phillips or nearby for like the last 50 years or so, and glad to be here with you. I'm gonna have to leave probably in about 10 minutes, so my screen might be gone as I commute to my next meeting, but thank you very much for having us.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and we really appreciate getting the opportunity to learn more about your work and look for opportunities for health professionals to help support work you're doing in your community, because we definitely recognize that these types of community initiatives are super important for supporting and protecting health. So I believe at this point, would you like me to share slides that you can use to continue talking about your project?
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, just let me know when you would like me to advance slides.
And I'll kick us off. And again, extending Steve's thanks. Thank you all for sharing space with us and giving us the time to explain what it is the East Phillips Urban Farm Project is about. I think it's important to ground us in that the point of this project is East Phillips is experiencing or has been experiencing environmental racism for nearly over 100 years. The neighborhood was designed by the city to be a place for undesirable residents, whether that be Black folks, new immigrants, or Indigenous folks. And that has accumulated into what we are experiencing now with the current state of environmental racism with the Hiawatha expansion project and the fight for an East Phillips Urban Farm project. And we'll be talking about that. Next slide. And so the other topics, that accumulates into this environmental racism, is, a snapshot of the opportunity and the choice, addressing the root causes of poverty, things about East Phillips, the vision for the urban farm project, and the feasibility of the project. And just as important, how can folks like you get involved? There are many components to environmental racism. It is not just access to trees or greenery. It does a lot more than that. It is about livability. It's about clean air, clean water, and also economic opportunity. Next slide. So the overview. So over a decade ago, the community came together and wanted to purchase the former Sears building right here, the Roof Depot building you see up right there. You see the iconic Roof Depot water holder at the top. And the community wanted to convert this building into a multi-purpose, multi-use facility that includes indoor urban farm that can grow food year round, but also be, it would also have affordable housing units in it, a cultural market, community space for educational purposes, a bike shop, and spaces to accumulate some of the artistic talent in the area. However, the city had other plans for the site, which it did not share with the community. The community came together, fundraised, $5 million to purchase the building. However, the city threatened eminent domain with the previous owner and essentially stole the land from the community. And again, this is a neighborhood with a high concentration of indigenous folks, so it's kind of settler colonialism all over again. And so what we face now today are two competing visions for the future of this site, which is one that is community driven and one that is kind of the top down, colonial, power structure that we are very, very used to at this moment, and has been a clash ever since. The site is also 7.5 acres big, so it is huge. It's one of the largest portions of public owned land outside of Upper Harbor Terminal that the city owns today. Next slide. So the community's plan is to renovate the community owned land, but it's also to heal the land as well. As I mentioned before, East Phillips is a specifically designed location for the undesirable residents living in Minneapolis. And, there are several industrial polluters in the area, bituminous roadways. There is Smith Foundry, who is active today, and other industrial polluters who are grandfathered in and who are allowed to pollute the area just because they've existed for a long time. And the contamination is so severe that it gives residents headaches. It smells up the area, and this has resulted in East Phillips having the highest rates of asthma in the entire city, in the entire state, in comparison. I'll turn down my. And so the area was also designated as a Superfund site back in the early 2000s. Again, because the area was allowed to be polluted by industrial, agents, many residential homes, including yards. Karen's yard was contaminated with toxic arsenic, for decades. And cleanup didn't start till the 2000s, and this wasn't detected until the 90s. So, for decades, the area was polluted. People grew vegetables in their yards. We had immigrants who, grew cultural foods that they were so used to eating at home, trying to grow it here just to get some level of comfort and semblance of home. And they didn't know they were consuming toxic arsenic. And again, we were dealing with, new immigrants. And so in the city back then didn't have a representation of these folks in government. So there was a language barrier outside of there already being a language barrier when it comes to contacting your council member about concerns or how the government works. And so people got sick. And there was cleanup in the later 2000s. However, parts of East Phillips are still considered a Superfund site because, although 500 homes, their dirt was unearthed, 6 homes exist today that the arsenic has not been cleaned up. This is just a result of the homeowners just resisting, the federal government coming in and taking out the arsenic. Next slide. So the community has another plan for the site that includes redevelopment and cleanup and healing the land. The city's plan is to demolish the warehouse, to consolidate its public works, department into one area. The reasoning for this is logistics. Roof Depot is located right there next to Cedar Avenue and Hiawatha, which have thousands of cars that run daily. And it's in a central location that can get to any point of Minneapolis, specifically downtown. So the logistics are, well, we'll cut down on fuel costs and our carbon emissions because, we'll be in a central location. However, what the city fails to acknowledge is that it will be centralizing the air car pollutant emissions in this area that, as I explained, is already overburdened. As they're not considering the cumulative impacts of the area. This in turn will free up land in the Marcy Homes area and all the other public works departments, which if you locate them on a map are in areas that now have high rents that can be redeveloped for, by private developers for, an up price and cost. But East Phillips, because it is a poor area, because it's already subjugated to such high levels of emission, because the residents there are low income and BIPOC, there's less political will to fight back, and there's not an economic will to fight back. So the city thinks this is an easy fight, but this has been going on for 10 years, so it's not quite as easy as they thought. Next slide. And addressing the root causes of poverty. So the plan for Roof Depot came about from the community. Our East African relatives brought up the idea of a farm so that they can grow fresh fruits and vegetables year round. This would all be fertilized by an aquaponics infrastructure that would be fed by walleye. And this was a request by our Anishinaabe relatives where walleye is a significant cultural food in their diet. And so you'd have this is a little gross, but you'd have the poop of the walleye providing nutrients to the plants, which would then feed people year round. And then because it's next to a greenway, we'd have a bike shop. Another thing that came up from residents was the need for more affordable housing. And so we would build, at least 60 units of affordable housing that is deeply affordable at 30% AMI. So rent would be about $500, which that's unimaginable unless you're sharing several rooms with folks in the area. And then cultural space and spaces for educational learning so that folks can learn different languages and so that folks could hold community meetings or any type of cultural events in the area, because as many of you might know, it's really difficult to organize and hold events in Minneapolis because we have such little public space available. And the very little public space that is available is already reserved, sometimes weeks in advance. So it makes it very difficult to plan these very important events. And so the community came together, and this was the idea that came about. And I'll also like to acknowledge that, some of these ideas have changed. These first sets of parameters came back in, the early stages of urban farm, and we surveyed the community back in 2021. And some folks have talked about there being a safe youth center in the area. or in the building. So, you know, much like the needs of our community changes with time, so will the components of our building, and it needs to change to meet the needs of the community, not what EPNI thinks the community needs. It's always been about the community and what it wants. Next slide. And this is just talking about how we are addressing the root causes of poverty, and the main component of that is, one, the cultural markets, but also the Roof Depot building would be owned by the community through public shares. And the shares would be divvied up to the community or the local residents at a discounted price, with it going much higher for outside investment. That way, much like I mentioned before, the components shift to meet the needs of the community at all times, and the community's voting on you know, these changes and how the money of the building will be handed out. And again, you know, we've done analysis on this business model, and it could turn up around $12 million a year. And I'll get into that later at a different slide. And so there is an economic, social, and health impact if we lose this fight with the city. Next slide, please. And again, this slide is more about, you know, residents in East Phillips are very poor. The average income in the area is about $32,000 a year. Little Earth of the United Tribes is located in East Phillips, and that, you know, median household income drops to $10,000 a year. And it's important to note that Little Earth is the only preferred Section 8 housing for Indigenous folks in the entire nation. And so East Phillips is extremely diverse, but extremely poor. And, you know, there's very little economic opportunity in the area. And that's what we're trying to bring with this project. And, you know, not only, you know, will the health implications be very severe, but we will be losing out on a social incubator and an economic incubator when it comes to the urban farm project, which would in turn continue the cycle of poverty that you see right there. You know, pollution impacts childhood development. We've had community members who have lost children to air pollution in the area, and that affects community well-being. You know, there's noise pollution in the area, heavy traffic. You know, people are stressed, and with that, you know, income levels drop. And so it continues, you know, without providing additional help, it continues this cycle of poverty. Next slide, please. And our plan, you know, promotes, you know, this equality that we're striving for in the city. However, the city tends to forget its own promises to its residents. Back in 2020, the city declared racism a public health crisis. And then later declared climate change also a problem that it needs to deal with through executive order. But as we're learning, East Phillips goes, you know, what they're trying to do in East Phillips goes against all of these promises. You could read right here, our city government takes strategic action to address climate change. But East Phillips is a heat island, meaning there's very little trees around. It's hotter in those areas. There's air pollution, both from the cars that come, the thousands of cars that come through on the daily, and also of the industrial polluters. But more importantly, the city's own project that will be coming in, which will introduce, you know, between 500 to 700 additional vehicles a day. And we're trying to say there's an alternative plan, but more importantly, the health of the community needs to matter. And the city's plan undermines this promise. Next slide. And again, the city's, the fight between East Phillips and the city is just classic 101 environmental racism. And this plan, with the loss of social and economic opportunity, will just exacerbate the poverty and illness in the area. Next slide. and I talked about this a bit ago, but the consolidation of the city's project in Roof Depot frees up the land in Northeast Minneapolis to be redeveloped. We're seeing this already with the consolidation of the fireworks department, and that building in Northeast is already being converted into a multi-use apartment complex. And so East Phillips residents are kind of stuck with the bag of pollution while other folks get more art spaces, more shops, and greener pastures, while we get the city's cars and diesel trucks. It's all about following the money. Oh, and at the bottom right, you see right there is a QR code that you can scan. That will take you to our direct action links, and there's a bit.ly for that as well. Next slide. And next will be kind of a more in-depth jump into the overview of the East Phillips neighborhood. And I'll call on Karen to go through this. And then Karen, feel free to declare next slide whenever you need to move through it.
All right. Well, this slide, I think you can see overview of East Phillips neighborhood on a number of different slides here. This is one of the most diverse communities in the city of Minneapolis, most racially and culturally diverse. And you can see some of the beauty of that in these slides. You'll see some other slides that show some of the hardships that we deal with, because while we're one of the most culturally diverse, we're also one of the poorest and most highly polluted, with toxic exposures of anywhere, really in the whole of Hennepin County, certainly in Minneapolis. I'm not sure what the next slide shows. Do we get into the next slide show some of those contaminants? Well, it's talking about there's a strong community. The community has been fighting with these issues and what some people call social indicators of health. We have documented in East Phillips the actual exposures that we experience disproportionately. We put it on a map. And actually, when I was in the legislature, we took that map to the state legislature and showed that issues like the arsenic contamination on a Superfund site right there in East Phillips, the only residential arsenic Superfund site declared in the United States, because our homes were deeply impacted, not just an industrial area. And we documented that, and we documented the disproportionate impact of asthma and of childhood lead poisoning. We put those all on a map, and we were able to pass a law that said, in this community, there needs to be stronger environmental protections, particularly relating to air pollution. And we've had several community meetings, I think you can see here, where we've actually talked about these issues just around this East Phillips Neighborhood Institute work that we've been doing. And there is a strong community in East Phillips that has been fighting these kinds of environmental justice fights for decades. Several wins that we've had include stopping a wood burning facility that was being proposed right in East Phillips. It would have been polluting our air. And we mapped where the plumes would be coming down, and we're able to stop that. We've been able to do a couple of other things, create something very positive like the East Phillips Community Cultural Center Park in just across the street from Little Earth, right in East Phillips. It was a big fight to get to that. And because the city had a different idea of what it should look like. And we hired our architect who's been working with us on East Phillips Neighborhood Institute, Dean DeVolis, and designed something that the community really can use, and is situated in a way that has some of the most vibrant BIPOC youth using it. And you can see the photo up on the left there that shows East Phillips Park. And the grounds there that are used for incredible soccer games and basketball and all kinds of things. But East Phillips community is in the South Side Green Zone. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because being part of the Southside Green Zones means that the city has made a promise. As Joe was talking about earlier, the city has made numerous promises to us about how they would deal with the issues of environmental racism and disproportionate impacts of toxic exposures on our communities. And what's being proposed with the city's project with the Roof Depot is a major breaking of that promise, major violation of that promise. And so just keep in mind, and if you get a chance to really review what the Southside Green Zone and the Northside Green Zone talk about, they were created, I think, in June or May of 2019. So we've had a few years that we should be seeing some results of more investment and stronger protections in those two neighborhoods. But for sure in East Phillips, we experienced just the opposite in regarding this, the Roof Depot project. I'm not sure what the next slide comes, does that show the?
Yeah, so you've got a slide here that talks about the racial and ethnic diversity that has been previously mentioned.
There it is. Yeah, that talks about the percentage of folks who are people of color and Native people in our community. And you can see that we are a majority people of color and Native American community, 38% Latinx, more than 20% Black or African American, about 18% Native American, 3% Asian American, 16% white, and almost 4% of multi-races. So I mean, we love our multiracial and ethnic diversity, but it's no accident, as Joe was explaining earlier, that we also have some of the highest polluting sources in the whole city. And this explains again here, this lays out the households in poverty. You can see that we have a majority of people who are below the poverty line, and as was mentioned earlier, some very, very far below the poverty line, Little Earth being one example. Go on to the next slide. Okay, this shows some of the toxic exposure sources in our city. You can see on the right, and on the top two slides, you're seeing the two major sources of industrial pollution in East Phillips, and you can see the overview of it in the lower right, the bituminous roadways, which is basically the asphalt plant that you can smell if you ever go through East Phillips on the Greenway or just walking down the street, and Smith Foundry. I've had a chance to walk through Smith Foundry and see what that is like, and it's quite amazing what happens in a foundry. But I can tell you that after I had a chance to visit there, I needed to air out and wash all of my clothes and shoes and everything. They were so stinky and smelly and covered with the kinds of things that are on the floor there. It's really it's a hazardous place to work. It's a hazardous area to live near, because the air emissions from those two facilities alone have permits that are more than 20 years old. I think more like 25 years out of date. And the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has not updated those, although we've been begging them to do it. And actually, we would hope in the future that we can see these two, and actually there's a third facility relocated somewhere else, but there isn't anybody, there are no places that really want to take them, it turns out. You can see the truck traffic there, right on 28th Street. That is kind of stuff that we have to deal with in our neighborhood all the time. And these are diesel trucks, heavy duty diesel trucks that put dangerous particulates into the air. And I think you all as public health professionals know that those particulates are very serious sources of heart disease, of asthma, of other neurological issues. We just are not able to get the changes from our own state and city agencies to help us, limit the kind of exposure that these industrial sources are providing in terms of air pollution. It's almost unbelievable, I have to tell you. Next slide. Yeah, and this is a statement from the MCEA, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, pointing out that our residents, those of us who live there, breathe some of the worst pollution in the city, and there are acutely toxic chemicals that we're dealing with. I can tell you, as mentioned earlier, I was, I think, number 30 of about 600 homes that were mandated to have our yards removed because they were part of the federally declared arsenic superfund site for residents. And that's just what's in the soil. What's in the air is something we have to deal with even after the cleanup was done of the soil. The photo you see here is the excavation that we drove past for many years while they were trying to clean up the pesticide plant that was the source of the arsenic from the 1930s to the 1960s. And the roof depot building that you can see in the background there sits right next to where this excavation was done. And we're very concerned that it is right now encapsulating or holding in place tons of arsenic laced soil. And the city's plan to remove to demolish the building will release that into the air. And we're very concerned about that. And we're actually meeting right now with the engineering firm to say, what in the world are you planning to do to protect us? Are you going to put a cover over the whole area like you might do in a home to stop the asbestos when you're cleaning up asbestos in your home? They don't really come up with the kind of answers we need yet. Next slide. And this says, again, very clearly what we know to be true, that the demolition of the roof depot will expose the community to more arsenic. This was in a proposal, actually in a document created by a whistleblower, letting us know that the demolition of the roof depot had alternatives. It didn't need to happen in East Phillips. It could stay right in Marcy Holmes neighborhood. And our effort to bring that up has been totally suppressed. This is a document that you cannot find very easily. If you want to, if this organization would like to look at it, we can certainly give you a copy of what we have. It was on Minneapolis City stationery, done by a person, again, who let us know about it very quietly because she was afraid of being exposed as a whistleblower and losing her job. So we're trying to figure out how to reduce that, and also if we cannot stop the demolition, we need to have protections in place. We're just trying to get some honest answers from the engineering firm that the city has hired to look at that, not only from the exposure from the arsenic, but also the traffic, the increased traffic that will be coming into the neighborhood, as Joe mentioned earlier. We have over 1,000 vehicles, 100,000 vehicles every day traverse through East Phillips, and that's documentation from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Next slide. Is there another slide there? There we go. This is part of the documentation of what we put together, indicating the rates of asthma, heart disease, and childhood lead poisoning, which causes severe neurological damage. We actually put this together in about 2007, 2008, we being the Women's Environmental Institute, and we worked with the GIS service of the legislature, and we put a dot on the map for every person who's been hospitalized for asthma, who has serious heart disease, heart attack, stroke, and who have experienced childhood lead poisoning at a rate of such severity that they need to have an intervention. And this is just indicating the arsenic, lead, and asthma concentration and how it's distributed. And you can see that area in Phillips neighborhood has thousands and thousands of dots that indicate these are real people who have this disproportionate impact of toxic exposures. And I have to tell you, when I was in the legislature, the head of the Health and Human Services Committee said to me, Karen, if you have children with this severity of asthma, just for example, with asthma, you got to do something about it. And I said, yes, please vote for the bill. And the chairman did vote for the bill, and it passed the legislature and is an existing law today. But guess what? The city of Minneapolis says they're not covered by this legislation. It doesn't really speak to the plan that they're trying to do. So that's why we're in court. I think we might have mentioned that East Phillips Neighborhood Institute is suing the City of Minneapolis and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency because our children and adults are much sicker, and the work to intervene in there is not happening. And we need to have environmental justice here. This is a map showing environmental injustice. So next slide. And this is a slide that shows some quotes from people who are talking about what it's like to be a resident in East Phillips. Carol Pass, one of our community elders who's lived in this community for several decades, and talks about the impact on families and especially on children. People ending up with a lot of trauma and health issues. And Cassie Holmes, who's the next quote there, is one of our champions who is part of the lawsuit against the City of Minneapolis, suing for environmental injustice. Cassie herself has been a spokesperson that shared her own personal tragedy of losing a young son to a heart disease that, as far as we can tell, was caused by an environmental exposure. Next slide. Well, this is the truth. The neighborhood is fighting for a better future for the children, and we are fighting. I think we're going to be going pretty soon to some slides that say how you can get involved and help us with this fight. As I mentioned, we are in court, and we basically have two things going on right now. One of them is an injunction to try to stop the demolition of the roof depot, because we don't want it to be knocked down and expose us all to more arsenic. And we want to deal with stopping the traffic intensity, which under the city's plan would only increase. And we think we've had incredible allies. I think your organization has been one of those, and you can certainly become even more involved. We've had incredible allies who've helped us raise the issues with the city council. What you should know is that the photo down on the right was at a city council member. Little Earth of United Tribes Drum Group started out that particular day, and they did again recently, asking the city to please understand the specific impact of this incredible environmental injustice on our Native communities, bringing a song of hope and resistance. And I just want to thank them again for their incredible speaking out. It takes a lot of courage to do that, especially in an institution like a government institution where people are making decisions about our lives. And I just want to say, having been part of that, I appreciate so much when citizens do this and they stand up and speak, even when they're supposedly not allowed to, especially when it's not solicited or necessarily allowed. You should know that the City of Council of Minneapolis voted in March to say that the city should drop its plans for the roof depot and allow East Phillips Neighborhood Institute to take control of the land and go forward. And it was a vote that had 8 city council members supporting that motion, led by our own city council representative, Jason Chavez. And Councilmember Chavez's motion passed with more than enough votes. You need 7 votes to have a majority. He had 8 votes, but guess what? Then that same day or the end of the day and beginning of the next day, the mayor vetoed that city council resolution. And we needed 9 votes to try to overturn the veto. We only had 8, we were 1 vote short. So now we are back in the position of having lost that battle with the city council. So far, we're not done, but there will be things that hopefully we can talk with you about, how you can ask some of your city council friends, representatives, people that you know, and your own organization's strength to go back to the original majority of the city council's support for this project. I think there's another slide. This is going back to the vision that we had originally of the urban farm project, and our motto has been urban farm, not toxic harm. And this just shows you again, I'm going to turn this back over to Joe here in a minute, but this just shows you again the vision we had that included a facility that was full of farms and markets and ways for people to get good paying green jobs and cleaning up the air and doing all of that. But we're struggling to hold on to that. You can see here we talked about urban agriculture, aquaponics jobs, healthy food, which I can tell you my own background in public health nursing, I know that healthy food is not only medicine, it is livelihood and it is life in many ways. Along with clean air and clean water, we need to be able to have good nutrition in our bodies. You are experts in that. So I just want to ask you to keep using that expertise and helping us go forward. Joe, I think maybe you'd like to pick up. I just want to make one assignment to you all if you haven't seen it. There's something called the Health Impact Assessment for the Phillips community. It was done between 2014 and 2019, and it gives a very good rundown of what the health impacts are in our community in Phillips. It was a study that had support from both the state legislature, city council, and others, but the city is not honoring it. One of the first things it said is reduce the traffic in East Phillips. For God's sakes, reduce that traffic. It's causing severe illness. And as was pointed out earlier, the city's plan not only doesn't reduce traffic, it increases it unacceptably, immorally, as a part of environmental injustice. So I'll just stop there. I think, Joe, if you want to pick it up.
Certainly. And thank you, Karen, so much. One thing that needs to also be noted outside of the, health implications of the project and the health realities of the neighborhood is also, the reason why food keeps coming up is that East Phillips is also a food desert. So it's important to note that the things that come up, the components of the urban farm are needs that are brought up by the community, but it's needs, that need to be met. Next slide. And again, I talked about the, cultural market and spaces for community. And this cultural market are, it's vendors, community vendors. They would have space within the Roof Depot building at a discounted rate to sell goods. Roof Depot would also sell the food it would produce at a very low rate because there's no fuel cost associated to this. And I'll get to that in a bit, but essentially growing in-house, serving it here, not very far to travel. Next slide. And talking about fuel costs, the Roof Depot project would all be self-sufficient. We have the fish supplying the nutrients for our plants, but we have solar energy that would supply the power. And it would be one of the largest urban solar arrays in the entire state. It'd be 3 acres. And not only would we produce the wattages to power our building, but we'd also, produce so much energy that we'd be able to sell it back to XL for a profit. And I'll get into that later. Next slide. And there would be a job training facility there. We allotted 50,000 square feet for there to be a job training facility. We were in connection with unions to operate that. And this would be hugely important, especially for folks to get involved with union work and also connected to these high paying jobs that we desperately need to fill now more than ever. Next slide. And now let's talk about the feasibility of the project, because I know that is something at least government workers always want to hear. They want to hear, that's great, but how is it feasible? Well, our project was designed by DGA Architects, which is a nationally recognized architecture firm currently. Dean DeValis, who was the lead architect on this, is in Djibouti talking to the World Bank about other projects. Next slide, please. And I talked about the, financial feasibility of the project. I talked about there being a financial analysis. This project would produce $12 million of profit to the city of Minneapolis, with around $2 million of profit going to East Phillips itself. As you can see, some of the breakdowns of the profits coming from rent, some of the cash flow from the cultural markets, and then also 500,000 coming from the solar array. So again, not only would we produce enough electricity to power our facility, but we'd be able to produce enough electricity to sell back. And this analysis was conducted back last year. We currently do not have control over Roof Depot, but with the advancements of battery technology, this number can go much higher than just 500,000 a year. Just pause on this for a second for folks to look at. All right, next slide. And again, EPNI is not looking to own this building. We have actually been working with the students and lawyers from the University of Minnesota to, deduce what ownership models can there be, or what can we essentially create so that this is community owned. And there are a couple options available, so that one, the housing component is covered. The tenants of the cultural market is also, well taken care of. And also it being flexible enough to have outside investors so that, the price of the stock increases so that folks in East Phillips gain a profit. Again, getting at that economic balance to all of this. And also to balance ourselves as EPNI so that we're not greenwashing the community out of its own project. We keep this affordable so that they are the main profiteers off of this. We're not creating this so that outside investors make a buck. We're doing this so that East Phillips residents can thrive for generations. Next slide. And so there's been a lot of information and a lot of, feelings as well. I see in the chat, the mayor. It's like, what can I do now? Well, as Karen mentioned, we are currently fundraising right now. We have a goal for $200,000 to cover legal fees because we are litigating the city and we want to win an injunction case so that all demolition and construction or plans for Roof Depot stop, and so that things are hashed out into the court. But it's important to note that the court case is simply for there to be no demolition of Roof Depot. Again, EPNI is not fighting for ownership. It is fighting for the health and safety of our community. And it's our understanding here with EPNI. I mean, we'd love to own the building, or not own the building, but for the community to own the building and for our urban farm project to be a reality. However, we firmly believe that with the building staying as it is, that is harm reduction in itself, because the residents aren't being exposed to toxic arsenic, or there's not an increase of truck traffic in the area. But again, help us raise those funds to sue the city. Spread the word. You don't need to live in East Phillips. Again, the city is centralizing its pollution in this poor neighborhood. And, the Hiawatha expansion project, the name of the city's project, is not an East Phillips issue. It's a Minneapolis problem because, one, we're not living up to our values. Our own government is not living up to its executive promises to not only our neighborhood, but to our sister neighborhoods on the north side. So it goes to question, what is the accountability for Minneapolis? Again, as Karen said, 8 council members voted in favor to give EPNI a shot to making this a reality, but our mayor vetoed it. That is not democracy. That is council members being shunned. That is voters being shunned. And so right here is just discussing the council members whose votes we have, some who are on the fence, and those who, oppose the Roof Depot project. And we urge folks to call, email these council members and tell them urge them to support the urban farm project and to stop. The city recently approved the beginning of an RFP process to demolish the building. They do need to come back in January to approve a vendor to then demolish the building. Urge these council members, especially the ones on the fence, do not allow the demolition of the building without the community's consent. The community does not consent to the demolition of Root Depot. Next. And again, thank you all so much for your time, for creating this space to, let us share our truth. And I guess right now, to take questions. I know we have a minute left, but maybe you could put them in the chat if you don't want to come off, unmute.
So
Yeah.
I have a question.
Thanks so much, Joe and Karen. And yes, anybody, please either put your questions in the chat, come off mute. Kathleen's got a question, so.
Yeah, I was wondering, can they demolish it if the lawsuit isn't settled? Like, if you have a lawsuit, shouldn't that be settled before they can demolish it?
Karen?
Unfortunately, the first thing we're trying to do, we did file for an injunction to stop the demolition, but that's a separate action.
Okay.
Lawsuit, environmental justice lawsuit does not necessarily stop the demolition of the building. So we need help with both of those things. We're still waiting to find out whether or not the injunction will be honored. And it's, we just filed it and we're waiting. The city attorney seems to have a hard time showing up for putting things on his calendar to talk with us. So that's, I hope that answered it, Kathleen. And by the way, I just want to say it's such a pleasure to see you as part of this organization. You're such a champion yourself in so many ways over the years in what you've been doing with environmental justice. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you.
Thanks. It's great to see you, Karen.
Agreed. Really appreciate all the mutual appreciation. For sure. I think, of course, the major question that emerged for me is like, what is the opposition? This seems like such a win-win for so many reasons. And I mean, clearly it's not just a pipe dream proposal. You have all put in so much effort and energy, from the ground up. It sounds like, actually getting community input that it's wanted, looking at all of the potential benefits and even speaking the language of a lot of elected officials of money, right? Like economically, this is good for the city. So what's the opposition? Like, I don't understand why they would possibly not be in favor.
As I mentioned, it's so complicated. Even then, we tend to find out more and more, like, new things come up. At first, it was just logistics. It was just convenient for the city. So classic top-down environmental racism. However, for the past year, we've learned, from the own city making, these documents public, that the consolidation is not by accident. It's on purpose so that it could redevelop its buildings in these trendy neighborhoods so that, either the continuation of gentrification or, building up the wealth in those neighborhoods. And again, throwing a bone to private developers. And is that right to sacrifice the health of, one of your poorest neighborhoods for the benefit of the rich? We don't think so. But, Mayor Fry and City Council tends to think that's fine. And that's not okay. I don't know if you have any more to add to that, Karen.
Just that the power of environmental racism is astounding. And it needs to be fought hard and with a lot of commitment. And there's no good way to explain that other than what I just shared. It's a really hard fight.
And again, it's one EPNI and the community is held down for nearly a decade. And we appreciate all the help we've gotten through the years that we continue to get from folks like HPFC.
I should add just one thing, one word of hope. The state legislature in 2017 was one of the final things I did when I was there. We put over $300,000 into this project to pay for architectural drawings, community organizing. Those words are in the law. So there is hope. There have been bodies of government that have been with us, and there's certainly many non-governmental organizations that are with us too. So, we have reason to hope, but right now the curve needs to switch to a little more winning side.
Yep. And again, another thing folks can do is, how they can get involved is, follow us on our socials, email us, get added to the email list to get notified for direct action or rallies that we're planning. We have a rally coming up this Sunday. It'll be at the Roof Depot building at 1 p.m. and that's 28th and Longfellow. And I can drop a link of that into the chat for folks. And again, it's showing up, sharing the information, donate if you're able to. But again, this is a Minneapolis issue.
I know other people might have questions, but has this been made public, this report that they had a plan for expanding the Marcy Homes site and yet they still went to Phillips? Like, was that disclosed? Because it seemed like a lot of people have a lot of misinformation about this project and they're going with what the city says. So
I can just say it was reported. I think it even was reported as existing. I think it started to be mentioned it, but we begged the city council to have a hearing on it. Please, can you just have a hearing and discuss this report? And they just said, oh, this was just some people playing around on their computer. They've poo-pooed it over and over. And I have to tell you again, it's on city stationery and it has 5 appendices. It's not just a little bit of fooling around somebody wishing. There are a lot of forces at work here that are making that report not being brought on the open, Kathleen. It's really frustrating. And if enough people demand it, it could be reported.
The lack of transparency is really astonishing, or maybe not, but frustrating. Yeah, it looks like Aliana, you have a question, so please go ahead and unmute and go ahead.
Thank you. If the roof depot does get demolished, is there still hope for parts of this project? I think one of the most surprising things in this presentation that I didn't realize was how big the site is, that it's about more than just the roof depot building itself. I didn't know that. So I'm curious about that. I was at that city council meeting where the city council voted to go ahead with the request for proposals for demolition, and it was really awful.
Yeah, I mean, that's worst case scenario. With the city's project, this expansion will make the city's current water yard, collectively be 16 acres. And 3 acres of that is unused. It's just like an afterthought land. It's land they're gonna just dump construction debris into, and that's the debris that land was what they were gonna give to the community as its compromise. So during construction, they would dump everything in this area, then they would clean it up. But we wouldn't be able, with this compromise plan, we wouldn't be able to develop on said 3 acres land till 2 years, 3 years into the future. And that's 3 years into what the hell is the world gonna look like then? The world looks weird right now. And so there will be 3 acres always with the city's plan, whether we take it or not. But that is something we're not trying to entertain. So I see a question in here: is demolishing the roof the depot allowed if it's a Superfund site? Can the EPA stop this? So that is a question we had for Ilhan Omar's office to follow up on, because the city has acknowledged that there is a plume underneath the Roof Depot building, and it claims that its demolition work and all the work it's going to do won't disturb that. However, they're going through Braun Intertech, which they've done work when it comes to line 3, and we all saw there were pipe leakage. So things happen in these things, or in these like huge construction projects. So can we really trust that they won't disturb that or expose community members to toxic arsenic, as well as other debris that might exist in the area, in the ground and in the water, because we have to remember there are several other industrial polluters in the area that, the chemicals have just accumulating for decades. And so we're going to expose community members to that plus construction pollution. And so we're trying to see, is the arsenic underneath the Roof Depot building, is it still a Superfund site? And what are the levers of the EPA that we can pull to stop this? So we're still waiting to see what that is. However, with the, households that haven't had their backyard dug out, it's still technically a Superfund site, but just for those yards. You can't really apply it to the entire neighborhood like you used to.
Go ahead, Aliana. It's a small enough conversation. You can just jump in with your questions.
Thank you. So Braun Intertech is going to be the engineer, is that right? But the request for proposal is for who will be the person or the group to demolish it. Those are separate things.
Yeah, they're separate. So Braun will kind of be like the engineering advisory, whereas the vendors themselves will kind of carry out their plans.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've run a bit over our allotted lunch hour slot here, but it was such a necessary topic to have a little bit more time to dialogue and learn more from you. Does anybody else have any final questions that you'd like to ask, or do our speakers have any final points that you'd like to make?
I was going to see if Karen was going to unmute first, but as I said, we take, when it comes to this fight, we take whatever capacity folks have, and we understand that it looks different, especially nowadays. There's so much going on and people are tired. And with that, whether it's donations, just sharing the information, coming to action, like, all of it is fine. If there are ways that interest you with getting involved with items and you have more capacity, whether it's making art or, making chants, I don't know, whatever it looks like, this fight always can use, different avenues of support. It's all grassroots led. It's all community led, take whatever. Karen?
Yeah, I would just add, if you as an organization decided, if even half of the people who came today decided to call their city council members, EPNI would get a call tomorrow like, what did you guys do? What's all the big uproar? Why are we hearing from so many people? And the reason I say that is because most people, I can tell you this as a former state legislator, just don't, take the time to contact their elected officials for many reasons. Busy, they'll think it'll make a difference, but I got to tell you, you could make a big difference just by either individually or as an organization contacting those city elected officials. And the mayor is the one who, vetoed the city council's majority opinion to allow EPNI to go forward. Keep that in mind. There are elections coming up, and it's just important to keep those things in mind. But I could just ask you, please do use your voice, either individually or collectively. It's very useful and powerful. And then if you know or can help us raise the funding that we need to fight in the courts, we can win this battle in the courts. You know, the city is very serious. If you go over to our site right now, you will see that all the beautiful signs that were put up by the children, the civil rights organizations, all the different groups, all of our allies, they were all taken down about 10 days ago. They just disappeared. Well, they were taken down very carefully. They weren't taken down by people who were just trying to rip down signs. You can't find a piece of it anywhere. I did find one little piece that was kind of hidden under the concrete barriers that they have also moved into the site that are intended, they're all along the fence on Longfellow. They're intended, I guess, to come out on the street and prevent us from going further there. And they've got barbed wire on top of the fence now. So they're very serious about stopping us. And guess what? We're very serious about not being stopped. And we would really like to do it through the courts and through the city policies and the council, rather than having to go there and find other ways to stop what is being proposed by the city. So you can help us. We really so appreciate it.
What is the next?
And you win too. This is as mentioned, Joe said earlier, this is a city. The city could be very proud of what could happen here rather than very ashamed.
When is the next city council vote on the demolition, or is not scheduled yet? So what is the timing? We could send an action alert out, but it would help to know the timing.
It's still unclear to us. We know, seeing their RFP, they want to have a vendor selected by mid to late January. And I haven't looked that far to see when the full council would come back. But it would probably have to come back through POGO, which is a committee of city council, and then go through full city council for a vote. So we're probably looking at maybe February, but we can get that out to your organization once we have more clarity. But there's so many ebbs and flows and changes to this fight. Who knows, maybe they could pull a fast one and have things done by December.
Yes.
It would not surprise me.
Yes.
So I don't want to give your organization a date that might change next week.
So
Yes.
call into city council as soon as possible. Yeah, that's and
Mayor Frey, right. Yeah.
I just want to say, like, thank you so much. I wish we had more people listening to this story because it is so critical. And it's so depressing that Minneapolis has 2 green zones that are just window dressing. So you put, you have Upper Harbor Terminal, and then you put an entertainment complex there that's not to the benefit of the community. And then you have this site, which is they're looking to put more trucks and more air pollution sources versus the benefit of the community. Like, what does it mean to be a green zone if you're not listening to the community?
Yes.
Sorry.
Exactly. No, you absolutely said it. I think that's a good question to put in your letter to, or however you communicate with the council and the mayor.
And the mayor.
Yeah, well, thank you again so much for joining us and for sharing the story. And thank you just for all of the work that EPNI has done. I think that this is a shining example of grassroots community organizing for the benefit of everyone. And I mean, you were mentioning that this should be a project that the city would be proud of. I think it's a project that the state should be proud of, you know, and particularly at this point where Minnesota has been in the spotlight for racial disparities and things like that, to show, you know, effort being put into trying to remediate some of that, you know, and again, like to let communities lead. It just seems like such a win-win. So
you can include the governor in your communications, the governor and our U.S. Congresswoman. We've asked them for help, so they wouldn't be they'd be a little bit informed, and you could help them get more informed.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like something everyone should weigh in on, and that it can be an example for other communities in the state, you know, as well, of how to come together and imagine possibilities that can become reality and should become reality. So yeah, well, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.